After my parents died, my sister and her husband planned to throw me out of the house and even took money from my college fund. But someone stepped in and surprised them. I never thought I'd be writing this, but here I am, feeling lost and betrayed by my own family. I'm a 22-year-old college student in my final year, living with my older sister Hannah, 29, her husband Alex, 31, and their 5-year-old son Jacob. It's been a tough year since our parents died in a car crash, and things have only gotten worse. Growing up, Hannah and I never had the best relationship. She's 7 years older than me, and I always felt like she hated me. When I was born, our parents were overjoyed. They'd been trying for another child for years, and I was their miracle baby. Hannah was already in elementary school by then, and I think she felt pushed aside. I remember one incident when I was about 6. It was my birthday, and our parents threw me a big party with all my friends from school. Hannah was 13 at the time, and she spent the whole day sulking in her room. When our mom tried to get her to join the celebration, Hannah screamed that she hated me and wished I'd never been born. I was too young to understand then, but that memory has always stuck with me. As we got older, the divide between us only grew. Our parents doted on me, always praising my grades and achievements. Hannah was a good student too, but she struggled more in school and didn't have as many extracurricular activities. I tried to include her in things, but she always pushed me away. When Hannah went off to college, I thought maybe things would get better between us. But whenever she came home for breaks, she'd barely acknowledge me. She'd spend most of her time out with friends or locked in her room. Our parents tried to get us to bond, but it always felt forced. After Hannah graduated and moved back home, things reached a breaking point. She'd constantly make mean comments about how I was the golden child and how unfair it was that our parents were paying for my college when she had student loans. I tried to explain that I'd gotten scholarships too, but she wouldn't listen. Then, last year, our world fell apart. Our parents were driving home from a weekend trip when a drunk driver hit them head-on. They both died at the scene. Hannah and I were devastated, but I thought maybe our shared grief would bring us closer. I was wrong. Since I moved in with Hannah and her family, she's been cold and distant. She barely speaks to me except to criticize or give orders. Alex isn't much better. He follows Hannah's lead and treats me like an unwanted houseguest. The only bright spot is little Jacob, who adores me. We spend hours playing games and reading stories together. It's the one thing that makes this situation bearable. But yesterday, everything fell apart. Jacob and I were playing hide-and-seek upstairs. He was running to hide when he tripped at the top of the stairs. I tried to grab him, but I wasn't fast enough. He tumbled down about half the flight before I could reach him. He had a small bump on his head, but he seemed okay, just scared and crying. Hannah and Alex came running when they heard the commotion. As soon as Hannah saw Jacob crying, she lost it. She started screaming at me, calling me irresponsible and dangerous. Alex picked up Jacob and took him to get checked out, while Hannah continued her tirade. She said I was a bad influence on Jacob and that she couldn't trust me around him anymore. Then she dropped the bomb. She told me I had to move out. I was stunned. I tried to explain that it was an accident and that I would never hurt Jacob, but she wouldn't listen. When Alex got back from the doctor, Jacob was fine, just a small bruise. He backed Hannah up. They both insisted I had to leave immediately. I didn't know what to do. I have no other family, and I can't afford my own place while finishing school. I spent the night in my room, packing up my stuff and trying to figure out my next move. This morning, something unexpected happened. Our dad's old friend and lawyer, Mr. Thompson, showed up at the house. Apparently, he'd heard about what was going on from a mutual friend of the family. He asked to speak to all of us together. Mr. Thompson explained that he wasn't supposed to reveal this information yet, but given the circumstances, he felt he had no choice. It turns out our dad had made a will before he died, and in it, he left the house to me. Hannah and Alex can't kick me out. Legally, it's my house. To say Hannah was furious would be an understatement. She started yelling about how it wasn't fair, how she was the older child and deserved the house. Alex tried to argue that they had Jacob to think about, that they couldn't just leave. But Mr. Thompson was firm. The will was clear, and if they contested it, they'd likely lose. So now I'm sitting here, in what I've just learned is my house, surrounded by half-packed boxes. Hannah and Alex are holed up in their room, probably trying to figure out what to do next. Jacob is confused and keeps asking why everyone is so upset. I don't know what's going to happen next. Part of me feels justified. After years of Hannah's jealousy and mistreatment, it feels like karma. But another part of me feels guilty. I don't want to make my nephew homeless. And despite everything, Hannah is still my sister. I guess I'm looking for advice. Should I try to work something out with Hannah and Alex? Should I stand my ground and make them leave? I'm feeling overwhelmed and could use some outside perspective. Update 1. It's been a wild couple of weeks since my last post, and I wanted to give you all an update on what's been happening. First off, thank you to everyone who offered advice and support. It really helped me navigate this difficult situation. After the bombshell revelation about the will, things in the house were incredibly tense. Hannah and Alex refused to speak to me directly, only communicating through angry notes left on the kitchen counter. Jacob was confused and upset by all the tension, and I did my best to shield him from it. About a week after Mr. Thompson's visit, I received a letter from Hannah and Alex's lawyer. They were contesting the will, claiming that our dad must have been manipulated or not of sound mind when he made it. I was hurt and angry. Our dad had always been sharp as a tack, and the idea that someone had taken advantage of him was ridiculous. I called Mr. Thompson right away, and he assured me that the will was ironclad. He had extensive documentation of our dad's mental state at the time, including a recent medical evaluation. He also revealed something that made my blood boil. Apparently, Hannah had known about the will all along. It turns out that shortly after our parents died, Hannah had gone through their papers and found a copy of the will. She'd hidden it from me, hoping I'd never find out. Mr. Thompson only knew because our dad had mentioned it to him in passing, assuming Hannah would have told me. This revelation brought back a flood of memories from our childhood. I remembered a time when I was about 10 and Hannah was 17. I'd won a big academic award at school, and our parents had taken us all out to celebrate. Hannah had seemed happy for me at dinner, even giving me a hug. But later that night, I overheard her on the phone with a friend saying how she'd accidentally spilled soda on my award certificate. When I checked my backpack the next morning, the certificate was ruined. There was another incident when I was 14 and Hannah was 21. She was home from college for the summer, and I was excited to spend time with her. I'd been working on a short story for a writing contest, and I asked her to read it. She told me it was great and encouraged me to submit it. The day after I mailed it in, I found a crumpled-up first draft in the trash, covered in Hannah's handwriting, pointing out every flaw and calling it amateur garbage. These memories and the revelation about the will made me realize that Hannah's jealousy and resentment ran much deeper than I'd thought. I decided it was time to stand my ground. I had Mr. Thompson draft a formal response to their lawyer, refuting their claims and asserting my right to the house. I also instructed him to begin eviction proceedings. It felt harsh, but I knew I couldn't continue living with people who had such little regard for me. The day after the papers were served, all hell broke loose. Hannah confronted me in the kitchen, screaming about how I was tearing the family apart. She brought up every perceived slight from our childhood, twisting events to make herself the victim. She accused me of always being our parents' favorite, of stealing her chance at a good life. I stood my ground, calmly refuting her claims and pointing out her own manipulative behavior. I told her about the ruined award certificate and the writing contest incident. For a moment, she looked shocked that I knew about those things. Then her face hardened, and she spat out that I deserved it for always overshadowing her. Alex joined in, threatening to make my life miserable if I went through with the eviction. I reminded him that harassment was illegal and that I wouldn't hesitate to involve the authorities if necessary. This seemed to take him aback. I don't think he was used to me standing up for myself. Throughout all of this, poor Jacob was confused and scared. He kept trying to get Hannah and Alex's attention, but they were too focused on their anger towards me. Eventually, I took Jacob to my room and read him stories until he fell asleep, trying to give him some peace in the midst of the chaos. The next day, I came home from classes to find the house in disarray. Hannah and Alex had packed up most of their things and left. They'd taken Jacob with them, leaving only a terse note saying they were going to stay with Alex's parents until this was sorted out. I felt a mix of relief and sadness. On one hand, the constant tension in the house was gone. On the other, I missed Jacob terribly, and a small part of me still hoped for reconciliation with Hannah. That hope was short-lived, however. The next day, Mr. Thompson called me with some disturbing news. While going through the financial documents related to the will, he'd discovered some discrepancies. It appeared that a significant amount of money that was supposed to be my college fund, had been withdrawn over the past year. Given everything that had happened, I had a sinking feeling about where that money had gone. Mr. Thompson is looking into it further, and we may need to take legal action if our suspicions are confirmed. So that's where things stand now. I'm alone in the house, trying to focus on my studies while dealing with all this family drama. I'm hurt, angry, and honestly a little scared about what might happen next. But I'm also determined to stand up for myself and what's rightfully mine. I'll update again when I have more information about the financial situation or if anything else major happens. Thank you all again for your support. It means more than you know. Update 2. Hello everyone. It's been about a month since my last update, and a lot has happened. I want to thank you all again for your support and advice. It's been incredibly helpful during this difficult time. First, let's address the financial situation I mentioned in my last update. Mr. Thompson's investigation confirmed our suspicions. Hannah had indeed been dipping into my college fund. Over the past year, she'd withdrawn nearly $50,000, claiming it was for family expenses related to my living with them. This discovery brought back a memory from when I first moved in with Hannah and Alex after our parents' death. I'd overheard them arguing about money late one night. Hannah had been insisting they needed to use all the resources available to them, while Alex seemed hesitant. At the time, I thought they were just stressed about the added expense of having me there. Now, I realized they were likely discussing my college fund. Mr. Thompson advised me to file a civil suit to recover the money. I was reluctant at first. Despite everything, Hannah was still my sister, and I worried about the impact on Jacob. But then I remembered all the times Hannah had taken advantage of me, all the way back to our childhood. There was the time when I was 12 and Hannah was 19, home for summer break from college. Our parents had given me some money to buy a new bike, and I was so excited. The day before we were supposed to go shopping, the money disappeared from my dresser. Hannah swore she hadn't taken it, and our parents ended up giving me more money for the bike. Years later, I found out from one of Hannah's old friends that she'd used the money for a spring break trip, bragging about how easy it was to fool her naive little brother. With these memories fueling my resolve, I agreed to proceed with the lawsuit. Mr. Thompson filed the necessary paperwork, and we waited for Hannah's response. It didn't take long. 2 days after the suit was filed, Hannah showed up at the house, alone. She was calmer than I'd seen her in years, but there was a coldness in her eyes that sent a chill down my spine. She tried to convince me to drop the suit, alternating between guilt-tripping and veiled threats. She brought up our parents, asking what they would think of me suing my own sister. I countered by asking what they would think of her stealing from me. This seemed to strike a nerve, and for a moment I saw a flicker of shame cross her face. Then she switched tactics, threatening to tell everyone we knew that I was abusive towards Jacob. I knew it was a bluff. There were no grounds for such an accusation, but it still hurt that she would even consider such a thing. I stood my ground, telling her that I was done being manipulated and taken advantage of. I told her that if she returned the money and agreed to family counseling, I would consider dropping the suit. She laughed bitterly and stormed out, saying I'd regret this. The next week was a whirlwind of legal proceedings. Hannah and Alex tried to counter-sue, claiming that the money was rightfully theirs as compensation for my living expenses. However, Mr. Thompson had thoroughly documented all of my contributions to the household, including the part-time job I'd taken to help with bills. During the proceedings, more financial irregularities came to light. It turned out that Hannah and Alex had been living well beyond their means, racking up credit card debt and taking out loans. They'd been using my college fund to cover their lavish lifestyle, assuming they'd never be caught. The judge was not impressed with Hannah and Alex's behavior. In the end, the court ruled in my favor. Hannah and Alex were ordered to repay the full amount they'd taken from my college fund, plus interest. They were also formally evicted from the house, with 30 days to vacate the premises. I felt a mix of emotions as I left the courthouse. Relief that it was over, sadness for the relationship I'd lost with my sister, and worry for Jacob. Mr. Thompson assured me that we could petition for visitation rights with Jacob if Hannah tried to keep him from me. As I write this, Hannah and Alex are in the process of moving out. They've been cold and hostile, but thankfully, there haven't been any major incidents. Jacob is confused and upset, and it breaks my heart to see him caught in the middle of all this. I'm trying to focus on the future now. With my college fund restored, I can finish my degree without financial stress. I'm also looking into therapy to help process everything that's happened. Part of me hopes that someday, Hannah and I might be able to reconcile. But I'm also learning to accept that it might not happen, and that's okay. I deserve to be treated with respect and love, and I'm no longer willing to sacrifice my well-being for someone who doesn't value me. Thank you all again for your support throughout this journey. Your kindness and advice have been a lifeline during this difficult time. I'm not sure what the future holds, but for the first time in a long time, I'm feeling hopeful.